And councillors who are attending electronically need to indicate nothing. This evening's presentation will start with Alicia Keating, Assistant Director, Corporate Services, Acting City Treasurer, and councillors who are perfect ventriloquism.
That was cool.
Alicia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So before you tonight, we're going to be presenting on the general fund revenue. This is a bit new this year because we do have our assessment numbers a lot earlier in the year than we typically do. So I'm going to walk you through where we stand today based on what we know. And I'm seeking direction, I guess, from council on how to complete the budget to finalize some of the budget deliberations. Does it work now? Ooh, okay. Okay, so to go very high level over the 2021 revenue, we have had a 2.18% increase to our assessment base. I'll go through some of the details later, but that relates to a 1.44% increase related to new construction and a 0.74 increase related to market assessment. Our strong development continues, shown through the new construction numbers, and we anticipate that to continue into the future as well. We have seen significant impacts to our non-tax revenue associated primarily with COVID-19, so there will be a lot of discussion about that tonight. And revenue does continue to increase at a slower pace than our typical inflation for the expenses for the majority of our city services. Okay, so the tax-based revenue, as I mentioned, did increase by 2.18%. What the province did, we spoke to them and they kind of walked us through our numbers. So we should have anticipated about a 3.5% increase to our assessment base this year. Due to the impacts of COVID-19, the province has reduced a lot of the assessment numbers for certain groups of properties. So within the city, that would have been our hospitality group, so hotels, motels, inns, etc. Any office complexes that had more than one tenant, shopping centers and strip malls, and restaurants and fast food properties. With that, they are still continuing to do assessments for those properties. So they have sent out basically questionnaires to each of those properties to refine exactly what the COVID-19 impact is. For example, we've received some ourselves that we have to basically note what our revenue losses have been to date, what we anticipate them to be. So there will still be assessment changes going into 2021. Some may be negative, some may be positive. It just depends on what the results are of those questionnaires. So overall, within the summary of revenue changes, our warrant revenue, as mentioned, 2.18%. Our community funding and equalization grants, we do get the base funding there, but we did see an increase of $135,000 to that line item. Federal payment in lieu of taxes rose by approximately $10,000. And our non-tax revenue is down by approximately $2 million. And I'll get through all the finite details of what makes that up. Revenue from reserves is a new line that you will see this year. That is a one-time adjustment that we are making for an accounting change that we made related to vacation accruals. That was a one-time blip in the system. With the implementation of Oracle. So we're bringing in funding to address that adjustment to help balance that off. You'll note that the second previous year's surplus is zero. We had been relying on that for the last number of years to balance our budget. we do not have that in 2021. The 2019 budget did not accommodate that. So that is also resulting in some of the revenue losses and adjustments that we'll be speaking about later. So overall, the warrant does account for a very large percentage of our revenue at 88.4%. And the next biggest grouping would be our non-tax revenue at 8.7%. Typically that would lie around 10%, but because of the COVID impact, that is reduced for 2021. Just a high-level summary of the impact on our non-tax revenue. The biggest hit that we are anticipating based on current usage would be our parking revenue. Next up would be our recreational facilities. That would include our arenas, our community gyms, our sports fields, and the like. Transit revenue is also a fairly significant reduction based on the low ridership that we're seeing. Some positives, dispatch services, as we're negotiating agreements and treating them more so like our fire services agreements that we've dealt with for LSD. So we are looking at full cost recovery for providing those services. So we're seeing some positive impact there. As mentioned, strong construction is anticipated to continue. So we're seeing a positive impact there of approximately $180,000. Fire services to LSDs. So this is a contract that is based on the assessment values within the province. So that is an increase for us of $46,000 approximately. The maintenance for our designated routes, these are rates that the province pays us. They're going up a bit as well, and some credit card cash back for usage of our credit cards. Just to look at some of the more detailed impact that we are seeing as a result of COVID-19. So within parking services, we are seeing a decrease of over $700,000. This relates to municipal fines by decreasing by 19%. Our core area meters are down approximately 37%. Hourly daily lots and fees are down 30%. And monthly permits, we've seen a decrease there of approximately 17%. Within our recreational facilities, we've seen a decrease there of, anticipated decrease there of just under $690,000. This would relate to canteen rentals, advertising revenue, not anticipating much revenue coming in there at all. Community room rentals, a 50% decrease, and that's primarily due to size, and we're not able to have some of those events that we used to have. The sports fields anticipating a 50% decrease, and arena rentals we're anticipating a 20% decrease. And one of the main reasons there is due to the cleaning time in between groups coming in, so there's not as much available ice time. Transit revenue, the fare boxes would be a 50% decrease. Pass sales, approximately a 44% decrease. And the transit rider card sales are seeing approximately 11% decrease. Other changes to revenue. So as mentioned, the dispatch services agreements, we are renegotiating some of those long-term agreements to incorporate the full cost of service provision. The increase is based on the expectation of strong development within our building and plumbing permits. And again, the fire services to LSDs increases based on the assessment base increases within the LSDs. Some of the proposed rate increases that have been brought forward from the 5-year plans that staff have created would be the final year of the Royals Field cost per game increase, Frederick Square and East End garages, the York parking lot, and the Officer Square parking lot increases there as well. So now here's the punchline, I guess. The 2021 revenue shortfall based on what we have submitted. We are starting to meet with departments tomorrow, actually, to walk through the detailed budgets. But we are anticipating that we have a shortfall of $3.1 million. 1.99 does relate to that revenue impact from COVID-19 and the restrictions there, as well as the reduction for demand for the service. We do hope that this is a one-time impact on the budget. So we're hopeful that 2021 will be the absolute anomaly from a budget perspective. But we do have a $1.2 million shortfall there that is essentially a structural deficit that we have in our budget. We had been relying on the second previous year's surplus to help fund this. But for 2021, with no second previous year surplus to fund that, that is a structural deficit that will be coming forward each and every year if we don't find a way to fund it. Traditionally, we had cut money from capital. That will only get you so far, as eventually that will result in increased costs associated with other operating expenses. So with that, as a municipality, we do have a few ways to address the shortfall, but we're also limited in a number of ways too. In order to deal with the $3.1 million deficit, it would require a 4.02 cent increase if we were relying solely on the tax rate. There could be service cuts or reductions to accommodate the reduced revenue and increased costs. We could cut the capital budget. The recommendation there would be to look at new and one-time funding to ensure that the renewal continues and to reduce the infrastructure deficit. Some other parts to that also pertain to the fact that a lot of our budgets are tied to the water and sewer budget as well for the construction costs. So if we're not putting in general fund funding for capital, we're not going to be able to help address the water and sewer deficit either. In addition to that, there are some federal funding programs that we are looking into. So if we cut that money out of the capital budget, we're not going to be able to leverage that funding in order to secure funding from other levels of government. Another option would be a hybrid approach. So to partially increase the tax rate to help cover the permanent structural ongoing deficits, and dealing with the more shorter term impact of the revenue loss through service cuts or capital cuts. Or we're also open to any other recommendations that council may have. So with that, I'm not trying to pitch anything. I'm not trying to steer council in any direction. I'm seeking direction in order to be able to complete the budget and bring that forward. So through you, Mr. Chair, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Alicia. First, Councillor Rogers, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't want to comment on anything yet because but I do have a question if we could get a bit more information, please. So thanks for this. I'm just wondering, Alicia, could you detail out a bit further the shortfall, the 1.19 resulting from, the increase? So I guess it's not a shortfall. It's actually, it's the result of our costs are going up. And could you maybe just detail for us what kinds of costs we're talking about?
Sure. So there would be a number of things that would fall into that bucket. Traditionally, we have found savings to accommodate any new growth through Lean Six Sigma. So some things would be new software costs. So Engage Fredericton is a new piece of software that we've put in place. It does have a $20,000 cost attached to it. So that would be over and above what we could typically absorb through some of the budgets. There are also personnel increases that would be above and beyond what the inflationary costs could be. So there's about $1 million worth of personnel increases in there as well. Insurance costs are anticipated to go up 10 to 15%. Which is again above the inflationary ability that we can absorb through the regular operating revenue.
Thank you. That's very helpful because it indicates to us these are not costs that are going away. In fact, they're going to creep. They're exponential, really, right? Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is the structural deficit that I'm talking about. These are permanent forever dollars that will be here next year, the year after, with no real revenue stream to help pay for them.
Thank you. Thank you.
But just as a point, they compound arithmetically, not exponentially.
Oh.
Thank goodness.
See, that's what you get when you're finance chair. You get to learn the lingo. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Councillor McDermott.
Thanks. I figured we've got a bit of time to have a conversation, right? So, thank you, Alicia, for a a high level look at stuff. Options are not pretty. I don't think anyone pretended that it was going to be pretty coming into this. And at this point, I don't want to get into, are we going to do a tax? What sort of combination of levers we pull to arrive at that. One of the things that I do want to, I want council to think about in regards to this is COVID's here for a while. And I know that we're all hoping for a vaccine and that sort of stuff, and that by the time we get through 2021, we're going to be through this. To your point, is that $1.99 million shortfall a one-time expense, or is it ongoing? Optimistically, it's one time. I think realistically, we have to be prepared that it is more than just that, which means, to me, a pretty serious and fundamental restructuring of how we operate. I don't think we need to make a decision around that this year. We'll know better in a year's time, obviously, what's happening. But I guess, the reality is there's a lot of hope being put into a vaccine, and there are a lot of viruses that there's no vaccine for. There's no vaccine for HIV. It's been around for 35, 40 years. There's no vaccine for diphtheria. There's no vaccine for malaria. Malaria is a huge scourge that has been killing people for a long time, and there's no vaccine for it. So I'm as optimistic as anyone else, but I think that we need to be sort of realistic about whether this is short-term, long-term, or what it means. And to that point, we're 7 months into this, and I see it in my meetings, I see it in my conversations with staff, that it is creating an enormous burden for staff. We've done a very, very good job over the past decade in terms of our Lean Six Sigma program and process improvement in finding efficiencies, reducing our workforce and that sort of stuff. My concern is that we're actually kind of at a breaking point. And to me, that's, in this budget conversation, that's one of the more important topics is, do we have the capacity currently to maintain the services without creating undue stress on our employees, which will lead to attrition, which will lead to sick days and that sort of thing. So I'm putting it out there for council that we may actually, we're talking about everything being flat in terms of our costs, understanding what our costs are, specifically around our expenses around human resources. And I think we need to, I think it's important that we look at what is the long-term effect going to be about this, and should we put something in place to ensure that city staff are able to meet the needs of residents in an age of COVID-19 that is creating a huge amount of stress. I don't have any answers. I know what I'm thinking, but I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Eric McGarity next, and then Bruce Grandy, Stephen Chase.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, this is not certainly good news. COVID-19 hit us hard, and now we're ripples. And I've got no delusions that the year after and the year after we'll be facing this type of decision making. And maybe it's 1.2 right now. Next year it could be 2.2. Who knows? But we have to find a way around it. But I want to focus on the province. You said that the business portion of the assessments. They reduced it where it should have been 3.5. This is another problem with our tax system. They make an arbitrary reduction without even consulting us. If they were going to do it, look, I'm not saying it's not bad, you know, businesses do need that, but they've got other levers there like business tax. They can reduce that in any amount they want to. So they're using our tax money to balance their books and helping businesses, which is really not fair. When we start moving capital money into operating costs, not a good thing. That's a slow decline. That's the end sustainability. So we've got some tough decisions. I'm not in favor of reducing our capital build costs because we were making some real good gains. And you know, when something like this comes along, we have to find other ways. So, there's a couple things there. So in those cuts on services, like 3.1 million, what are we looking at for service cuts if that happens? That's major.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be council's discretion. I'm not making any recommendations tonight on what service cuts could occur. Depending on what you looked at, you could look at services that are being impacted by the revenue loss. That also creates a very sticky situation because you're looking at transit and parking and our recreational facilities. So it's tough to cut anywhere, arguably more tough to cut in those areas. So it would definitely be something that we would discuss as staff and could come forward with what those numbers could be. But as it stands right now, staff aren't recommending any cuts. It would be up to council's discretion.
Thank you. The last question is, we haven't heard from the province about relief coming our way to municipalities in general.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have had a number of discussions on a number of fronts as far as operating recovery and some potential capital funding. Nothing has been confirmed to date. And I don't know if that's retroactive and would impact only 2020 or if that would be going forward. So I know Chris, I think, has been in talks, but we don't have anything definitive at this point to be able to bake into the budget.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Grandy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Alicia. Delivery of good news, as always. And I mean that jokingly. You do a great job, and their staff and everybody else in our organization. I guess I was listening to a conversation this morning from the Canadian Tourism Association and Brunswick Tourism Association about where our numbers are, and the fact that what they're predicting. Well, they indicated that 2019 was a banner year for tourism in New Brunswick. 1.6 billion, I think, was the number floated as far as economic impact. 33,000 jobs in that aspect. And with the onset of COVID, they're actually down in 70% of that, over almost 70% reduction in employees, and farther than that in economics. This summer with the incentive program, it came back a bit. It helped St. Andrews in a few spots like that. I think they had $14 million of applications of the rebate. They can only get out so much. There's only so much available, but people stayed home. And what I'm getting to is that in that conversation, the prediction was it won't be till 2023 that any resemblance of revenues come back to that industry. And that's not going to the banner year of 2019. That is just coming back up to try to get people to travel again. And that is all dependent on the open borders of the United States. So what I'm getting to is I'm just having the same thing that John talked about. I'm just giving something for council to think about. We're in this for the long term. The next council is going to be challenged dramatically about the challenges over at least the next 2.5 years until some things start to rebound here. So it's a long-term strategy here. I guess when you look at it, Councilor Gary talked about 3.1. It's really not 3.1. It's 1.19 of structural deficit, which we have to find to keep the corporation sort of afloat, I would say, to compensate for the inflationary costs. And then the 1.9, and as far as 1.9 goes, to me, I think we just have to think about what is it we don't have to do, or what is it we can modify to make up for that $1.9 million as we go forward. But the more important issue is the 1.19 as far as I'm concerned. And how do we address that? So is it, service cuts? Is it layoff of employees? Is it, any number of things? And I think it's hard. I know what you put on that second to the last slide for us to think about, but I think it's hard for us to give you, it's hard for me to give you a decision on one of those lines without some more ideas and data. So what does reduction in services of X, and I don't know what they are, it could be a list of 5 or 6, so you only listed 3 or 4, but I think there's many more in there that could be impacted, reductions. And I think what we have to do, and keep in mind, it's not about reducing for the long term, it's reducing for the short term for now. And then hoping that your economy rebounds in 2023, 2024, where you have much more economic activity in the province and in our city, that allows us to have a better discussion, or the council of the day have a better discussion on do we need to continue with cuts? Do we need to continue with reallocating money from capital to other things as we go forward? So there's just a few things there, but I'm under the guise of wanting to see some ideas come back from the CAO and assistant CAO and finance on what this might look like as far as the balancing of services. What I'm not in favor of, I'll tell you certainly what I'm not in favor of in this time in COVID, is I am not in favor, and I'll vote against any tax increase for the people of the city, because as much as we're challenged, they're challenged too. A number of people who are trying to find housing, who are trying to keep their head above water, is massive. The population is really challenged in the city, and that's just my personal opinion. I think we need to find other places to have this conversation with. But I'll just leave it as a thought to council as we go forward. But right now I can't give you one of those 4. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Next on the list, I have Councillors Chase, followed by Councillor Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, my view of city operations is that we are already skinny. And I agree with Councillor McDermott that staff are at the breaking point. The level of service is probably the minimum that we can provide. There's no fat. I think the fat has been removed in the Lean Six Sigma process, over the past several years. COVID, for its impact, is going to continue well into 2021, and probably longer than that, by all of the estimates. And so I think we're looking at another, whatever we're down this year, the 1.99, it's going to be at least that in 2021. We need to continue pursuing our infrastructure upgrade plan. I'm not prepared to kick this issue down the road. I think it's incumbent upon us to deal with the fiscal situation, at least until and increase our revenue stream, at least until the economy and has rebounded. I just don't see any latitude in delivering the range of services that people expect without increasing our revenue stream. We're down in revenue. I mean, we run a very lean budget, I think. And yeah, look, everybody's hurting. But I frankly, when I see, the need, I think we really have to bite the bullet. And I think we've coddled people on the tax rate, for the last several years. I do, that's why, our revenue stream is 4 cents, if that's what the 4 cents is what's predicted to make up the loss in revenue, I mean, that may be in part because, we just haven't dealt with, the revenue stream adequately. I don't know. I would really like to see after this discussion, some options come forward from staff as to how we can do this. I'm not advocating, 4 cents increase in the tax rate. It could be less than that. But I really, again, I'm going to say this again, I'm not prepared to kick this issue down the road further. And it's, this COVID road is a long road. It's measured in maybe up to 2 years. I mean, who knows? We're in uncharted territory, fiscally. I just don't see any silver bullets coming from the province or the feds. I think we have to do this internally. This is our issue to fix. And that's what I'm looking for is, some advice from staff that would, help us chart our way through the fix. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Keenan, if you're with us, you're up next. Then
yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
yes.
Good, thank you. I have a couple of questions and then some comments, if I might. So I'll start with a couple of questions for Alicia, if I could, Mr. Chair. Have we built in, Alicia, to our estimates the 5% annual increase in our capital infrastructure funding? Is that part of what's creating our shortfall? And if it is, how much have we added? What's the 5% work out to for this year?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have included that. That was part of our long-term financial plan to incorporate as an inflationary cost. It's about $686,000 that we have added for 2021.
Okay, thank you. And I'll make a comment now. I can't imagine how we could consider going through with this 5% increase, which is well above inflation, as we know, and we've been doing it. I can't imagine how we would want to increase the infrastructure budget by that amount in a year such as this. So that would be my first point. In regards to the assessment increases, if you said it, I missed it. Did you have a percentage increase, average increase in residential properties? Do you have that information?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. The average increase to the residential properties is 3.81%.
3.81. Okay, so yeah, so fairly significant. And that's been what I have noticed. I'm hearing a lot of properties have the assessments have increased quite substantially this year. So our homeowners are already going to see an increased burden, many of them up to 10% for their property tax bill because of these increased assessments. And it's being offset by the fact that that our businesses, the assessment on our businesses is going down. And I think Councillor McGarity spoke to why were those dropped? Well, the value of those businesses has dropped substantially during COVID. So I think it's appropriate that the provincial government is dropping those assessments because the value of their business is substantially less now than it was a year ago. Many of them are probably very close to losing their business. So I think it's appropriate that that would have happened. So those were my two questions, and then. So in regards to comments, first, kind of along the same lines as Councillor Grandy, in that I'm not sure how we can provide direction on what we want to do in regards to revenue until we have a better understanding of where our opportunities are to reduce services or to reduce capital. And it may well be at the end of the day that there does have to be some sort of hybrid, but I know I'm of the same mind. I'm not at all inclined to approve a tax increase in a year where, for instance, if we do that, we're just reestablishing a burden that on our businesses in the community that they cannot afford right now, and we're going to lose them in the long term. So we got to have a little longer term vision here than short term. And also the burden on our homeowners, many of whom are still, many are struggling for work, and many are struggling to find steady employment. And I think we may even be seeing the tip of the iceberg here. If the government ever steps away from all these subsidies, who knows what could happen to our economy at that point. So, I mean, we may see worse before we get better, but all that to say, the idea that we would raise taxes in this time, I'll paraphrase. I'm going to use a quote that I like to use quite a bit about socialism. I'm just going to incorporate municipal tax rates. Eventually, you run out of other people's money. And I think that's where we're at. We have run out of other people's money right now to go to them and say, here, we've got a problem, you pay more. So I think that we've really got to look hard at reducing our what we're doing. And maybe some of those reductions are temporary, and we relook at them after when the economy comes back, the retail sector will come back. The commercial sector, there's a restructuring going on there that who knows when that will come back, or if it will. It certainly won't come back the same way it was. So I think we've got to be prepared for that. And we already know that housing assessments are increasing dramatically. So even if we hold the tax rate steady, we're going to see those improvements over the next couple of years. I think we'll see, once the economy turns, we'll see our assessments increase by fairly high percentages over the next few years, I would expect. So we could reduce services temporarily, or we could reduce our capital program temporarily. And again, if in your household budget, if you don't have the money, there are things you don't do, and you have to make a decision. Do you send your child to your camps? Do you go on the trip? Do you fix your steps? Do you fix your roof? Do you put in a pool? And those are the decisions that you have to make as a homeowner. And I think that's the approach we should take for ourselves. One other point, because people have spoken about staff pressures, and I do agree there certainly have been added pressures from staff. And I don't think this will be a very popular comment, but I think the biggest issue, certainly with our senior staff, and this is only my opinion, is our lack of fortitude in moving forward on our initiatives as a council. And I think that we have spent far too often allowing ourselves to be redirected and hewing to and fro based on special interest groups that come forward, and they overtake our agenda. And we've allowed it to happen time and time again. And I'm pretty sure it frustrates staff. And that's probably the biggest issue. Officer Square is a case in point where we had an agenda, we had a plan, and we allowed a special interest group to throw us off of that. And we've spent countless hours and days and months, and staff are the ones doing it. And we spent that time floundering around because we couldn't hold to a decision that we had made. And we made that decision with good information, and then we didn't hold to it. I'm just as guilty. I'm not saying it. I think it's collectively all of us. And I think if we want our staff to stay and to have our good staff, I think the one thing we need to do is to make decisions and hold to them and show some fortitude in applying those decisions. They're done with good forethought, and they're done with staff input. And I think that's what impacts us. So I guess those would be my comments right now, and look forward to what others have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I next have Mayor O'Brien, followed by Councillor Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great discussion here tonight, and I'm of the same mind here. We can't decide tonight, and I don't think I'd be shocked if the staff thought we were going to make the final decision tonight. I'm going to put it right on the table too. I'm philosophically always opposed to a tax increase until that is the last absolute option available. I've been consistent over 19 years on that, and it hasn't changed here either. Having said that, these are extraordinary times, and extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And I don't know what those are yet. It's been put in front of us. It's disappointing in one respect, but this year with our assessment increase, our new construction doubled our market assessments. And that's what you really want. You really want the new construction to outpace the market increase, and it doubled it this time. But now we're still faced with this structural deficit and the COVID issues. The province will come to the table with some COVID money. I don't know what it's going to be yet. It's not going to solve it, but it'll be something. And you know, I think it'll be something hopefully substantial, but you know, we can't rely on that. But there's been some good conversation here tonight about you know, maybe not the 5% increase on the infrastructure renewal. And I'm all for the infrastructure renewal program. I was finance chair when we brought that in. So I know it, and I brag about it all the time. But as I said earlier, extraordinary times sometimes call for extraordinary measures. And you had mentioned that you would, if we did something, you would recommend it be new projects. And I agree with that, you know, back off on new projects if we can. So it's the new stuff that I've got to see the details on before we can make a decision. Hopefully the province, knowing that the province is the one that wanted to step our budget up by a month this year. So hopefully the province can come with some information on some COVID relief, whatever it's going to be, so we, you know, before the ink dries on their budget. And if so, we may have to delay our budget by a bit. That's not what we like to do, but you know, if we have to, we have to. So there are some things to look at. It may be some partial service reductions for a while. Not easy to do. Our residents expect the top level service, and they deserve top level service, and we provide it. And I think we're very proud of that, and that's one of the reasons we're growing. People want to live here. Newcomers want to be here, and we got to make this an attractive place to continue to grow and prosper. But we may have to take just do a couple of belt notch tightenings for a year or two. We all talk about when this is going to be over. We don't know. We don't know. All I know is that when it does go over, this city is poised to explode again. We have the infrastructure in place, we have the people, we have the programs, and even if we have to delay for a year or two, this city is going to be a shining light across Canada, and we'll come out of this when the time is right, as strong as any city. I just know it. But for the time being, I think we have to take a step back and really dig into the details. I know there's not much time left. You know, the schedule's aggressive this year, but I think it's incumbent upon us to really dig into some of the details. Ask our great staff to come back with some real tough recommendations for us to look at, and then we're going to have to collectively dig in. So can't make a decision here tonight, but there's some big decisions to be made, and we will do it. We always have. So thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I know you're not looking for any decisions. I know enough to know you are looking for direction. So you need to get a good enough sense from this around these tables to know, to point you into a direction of where to put your next energy. So I can only speak from my perspective, which is, I think we are already an extremely lean organization. I've supported our lean efforts. I think at times they have come at a cost. I think we're too lean in some areas already. I think we are seeing some burnout already. I don't want to go any leaner. If there's one thing I know from my line of work and from a lot of people's lines of work, when you're in the business of providing services to people, they're in no less need during a pandemic. They might not need you to be at the rink, but they need you doing something else, being creative to come up with another idea to fill that gap. So I don't think that that during a pandemic is the time to be cutting services. I think it's probably a reallocation of resources to focus in other areas. But I don't think that any of our staff have been feeling underworked during this pandemic, and that's not going to change. I would say from my perspective, certainly in the sector that I work, if anything, people are being overtaxed at this time. They're not being undertaxed. So I do not think cutting services is an option. It's not one that I could support in good conscience. At the same time, I also cannot support in good conscience a tax increase. The revenue problem that we're seeing has been building. This isn't new. anyone who sat around this table last year, we put off making some hard decisions. We've been putting off making some hard decisions. We put off one last year and it's come back to bite us this year. And so I think that unfortunately it's come back to bite us at a year that I am not comfortable going to the public, because they too are struggling. And if they're not struggling now, the uncertainty of what might lie ahead, even for people who are in very secure jobs, I don't think that this is the time to be doing a tax increase either. So that leaves us, of course, the capital budget. Dan, I think that's brilliant that you uncovered 600 and some thousand for us with that 5% that we put towards the infrastructure. So, I mean, to me, that is potentially an obvious one. I would be willing to forego on some other capital areas. To me, that's the only place where I'm comfortable looking at this stage. I know it's still early days, but if you're looking to weigh into where I would want to see some effort, it would be in looking at where we can cut some of our capital costs. So I guess I'll just leave it there. And I'm also very aware that as we get more information, maybe I'll sing a different tune, but I can't imagine. I feel pretty firm in all of those stances.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mellet, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Alicia, for the presentation. I do have a couple of questions. The 3.5% plan assessed value from the businesses that went down to 2.18. Do you have the difference of what we were going to get if COVID didn't hit and what we're getting now? Like, how much are we affected by that reassessment from the province?
So through you, Mr. Chair, that would be the difference. So the province would have projected that we would have gone up 3.5%. The actual non-residential component was an actual decrease of 1.91%. So that's essentially what brought us down to the 2.18% number overall.
So how much is that in dollar amount from the 3.5 to 2.18?
As far as revenue numbers, not knowing that calculation right off my head, but I'm guessing it's about $2 million. I can do that calculation.
And then on the 2021 revenue shortfalls on stuff like the recreation facilities, is that based on rules that are in place right now? So depending how COVID reacts, right? If the rules change from the province, is there a chance that we can rent more ice time in future?
Through you, Mr. Chair, they have only reduced the arenas by about 20%. They feel that's based on the current sanitization and cleaning standards that would be required. Could that go up a little? Potentially. But just based on the fact that we do have staff that would need to go and sweep and clean through those areas, staff feel that is a realistic number to achieve for 2021.
Thank you. And not to repeat what many of my colleagues said, I think city's hurting. I think COVID plays a major role in it, but so are the taxpayers. So that tax increase, and like Councillor Keating mentioned, they're already going to be hit with an assessment increase. So I'm not in favor of that. I think I'm kind of looking at the hybrid form, but in between capital and services. And obviously, I think that's a discussion we need to have as council, because right now we don't have a list of the services that we have. We don't have a list of some of the capitals that we have. So I think it's going to be an exercise from council. I don't know what timeline is for that, but I think we'll need to sit around and look at the list and see which one we can maybe not cancel. Maybe it is, because I have full confidence in the city. I have full confidence that when things start turning around, we'll be doing really well, because I think we put the base for it. But I think that's a conversation we need to have. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Grandy.
Yeah, I just want to say, Mr. Chair, I think it's important. I know the province expects, and the mayor alluded to it, budgets to be on time at a certain time. This is a substantive issue. What we're faced with is substantive, and I would just remind everybody, I think we need to do this in a very succinct and organized fashion and take our time, because as Henri has talked about, it's going to be a hard conversation. And I just wouldn't want us to be pressured into speedy decisions on things because we want to meet a certain objective from the province. You know, we're all under tremendous pressure. Staff's under tremendous pressure. And I think the most important thing we can do is take our time. So I'm looking to you, Mr. Chairman, leadership, as far as having that conversation, but doing it in a progressive manner that's methodical and allows us a good conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent point, Councillor. Alicia, could you review for Council our budget schedule and the flexibility that we may have?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Based on our current budget schedule, we would be meeting next Monday and potentially Tuesday to talk through the service budgets, with the final budget resolutions coming forward to City Council on November 9th. With the changes that had been recommended and proposed by the province, the legislation did not actually change. Budgets are technically not due until November 30th. So that would mean theoretically we would have to have them approved by November 23rd to get them submitted to the province by November 30th. That being said, other people have their budgets submitted later than November 30th as well. So we're definitely able to add an additional 2 weeks to that cycle and still be able to submit on time.
Thank you, Alicia. I've Deputy Mayor Hicks, then Councillor McDermott, Melee, and McGarity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to lie and say this is great news we're getting, but I mean, really, it took a pandemic for us to get here. I mean, these are some of the decisions that a lot of cities have to make each and every year. We've, managed our finances from council to council over the decades. Staff has done a tremendous job. We're in a position that we're looking at cutting new capital potentially as solving the solution for the short term. I think that's a pretty envious position that a lot of cities would love to be in. So I don't want to make it out to all being doom and gloom. We can certainly get through this, and we can't do it at the backs of the taxpayers. There's a lot of people suffering out there, and it's just the start. It's going to happen for some time. But I go back to some of the comments about, staff being at the brink and being pushed to the limits. Well, a lot of that's our own doing. Councillor Keenan mentioned. I think we sometimes ask too much of staff, demand too much. The public demands too much. I mean, we're a civic organization. We have certain duties and responsibility. And a lot of the conversations over the last number of months and years of looking to expand what we do, I think this should be a reminder that we need to stick to our core services and what we do best. And we do it very well. And that's why we're able to go through this budget, and we'll get through it, and we'll be better coming out on the other end. But I think to consider a tax increase during these times, that's just salt in the wounds of our taxpayers. Something I'm certainly not willing to consider at this time. There may be a time when that needs to happen, but it's certainly not this year. So anyway, I look forward to seeing some potential solutions coming forward, and hopefully we can all get on board and make some tough decisions. Thanks.
Excellent point, Councillor. Excuse me. I now have Councillor McDermott, Melee, and McGarity.
Thanks for you, Mr. Chair. Our capital budget, it would be really helpful to know what's coming down the pipes before we meet next time, so that we have a list that we can look through to understand what those implications are. I think, look, to me, the tone around the room here is we're not cutting taxes, so someone else does have to give. I'm not in favor of reducing services. I think services and capital they serve two very, very different functions, and the services are, notwithstanding the fact that our capital improvements and that sort of stuff improve quality of life, but our services really are a fundamental part of that quality of life. closed ranks are going to have way more impact than letting our curbs and sidewalks go for a year or two. I've been in Moncton, I've been in the CBRM, Cape Breton Regional Municipality. I know what it's like when you leave stuff for a very long time. It's not pretty, but I don't think we're even close to that. So I would like to see a list of those capital projects, both for renewal as well as the new projects. I mean, the renewal is generally, what is it? 85% of our capital is renewal, 15% new.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's 75% renewal.
Okay.
10% is new and 15 is studies and plans and design.
So that top 25 is less of a concern to me than, I say less of a concern. The renewal part, we've done such a good job in terms of identifying and addressing our infrastructure deficit. But again, I think it goes back to extraordinary times. Can we afford for 1 year or 2 years to cut that? And I would like to have that list so that I can look at it and see. Now, again, I'm not the engineer. I don't know what state these things are in, but it would at least give a good idea so that next time we have this conversation, we have something to base it on.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the intention is to bring forward capital next week. Given the timelines, I think that is still doable. We are going to have a conversation tomorrow as staff to kind of finalize that list. So council would have that in preparation for next week.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Millet, then McGarity, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on Councillor McDermott's point, I don't know if it's doable from staff, but I think it'd be important that when we have that conversation about possibly canceling some of the renewal project, the impact that it might have in the short term, long run, depending on the project that we may or may not decide to cancel. I do have another question that was raised. I don't expect a silver bullet from the province or the feds. I do expect help. I know we don't understand if it's going to be 2020, if it's might help in 2021. I think it's important that we get our fair share. Right? Let's say the feds do send some money our way, that it makes it to our city. If it was aimed for municipalities that have transit, I think the entire amount should come to cities that have transit. So we got to make sure that we do get our fair share from those programs and that we don't lose out just because we might be in a better spot because we've been making good decisions in the past. I'm just wondering if we don't have that information from the province to how much they're going to help, if any, before November 30th, what happens? What is there consequences if we don't have our budget in by November 30th? That's my question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have submitted our budget late before. Basically, what the legislation states is if we do not submit a budget, the minister can actually apply a tax rate to the city of Fredericton, and we would have to build a budget based on the tax rate set by the province.
So, but you also mentioned there's some municipalities that have been putting their budget in late. I'm guessing the minister didn't apply rates to them.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know that. I know that the year that we submitted ours late, they did not apply a tax rate to us. Their issue is they issue tax bills March 1st. So they need a rate in order to send out the tax bills. So without that, someone has to set a rate for the municipality. So if it's not the municipality, it would be the province.
I just think that COVID fund and that information is going to be really important to make our decision around the table. Thank you.
Excellent point, Councillor. Councillor McGarity, then Grandy, and then Chase, please.
Well, 4 cents per 100, that's probably the biggest increase that I've ever seen since I've been on council. It's 13 years. So that's something I never would ever thought that we would be faced with. Saying that, some people mentioned the building was, if you're building decks or pools or anything, you couldn't because all the contractors are busy. So money was being spent instead of spending outside, people were staying home and spending it within, which is good. That money stayed here in the city. So a lot of that money that was going to go to other areas across the world stayed here. So that's the good news. But I just want to clear something up. There's a couple of councilors saying that I didn't believe in this, the business tax. Well, no, if they listen intently, I said, I do believe that. But my question was, why is the province yet again playing around with assessments, our money as tax money? If they want to do that, then they should reimburse us. It's a good idea to help business. It's a good idea to help individual property owners. I get all that. But when one side of government makes a decision on money that should be coming to municipalities across this province, then they should at least consult us, at least, and tell us ahead. So, I mean, that money has put us into a deficit position. So that's my make the decision, but at least reimburse us. The province has so many other areas, they have tax fields that they can do that. So why are they using our money, the little bit of money that we get? So that's my question. If they want to do that, great, good idea, but reimburse us. And that was my point. Thank you.
Thank you for clearing that up, Councillor. And Alicia, feel free not to answer that question if you choose. Councillor Grandies, then Chase, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. Alicia, when you come back, when staff get together and talk about this and come forward, you have mentioned we're not sure. Well, you said there's other programs that would affect us, so we couldn't use capital. I think when you come back, I think we need to understand in those lines that you say, if you did X, you could get funding in this amount probably in a share model. But if you brought it over here, you wouldn't get it. So we need to understand what those programs are when you come back with that, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can identify those ones.
Yeah, it'd be really good to line it up with each sort of thing you're looking at. If it has a program attached to it that we may be able to get funding on ordinary instead of over to capital, at least we can have a good discussion to make that decision where we want to go. Thanks.
Excellent point, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Chase.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I say we take, whatever time we need to exercise due diligence on this file. And if we're a week or two late in making our submission to the minister, I really don't think there's going to be any adverse consequence from that. On the matter of deferrals, yes, I would like to see, the various deferral opportunities that staff may be able to identify. Just going back to some of the Finance Committee reports, in the course of the year, we recognized that there was revenue shortfall early on, and we talked about making that up with deferrals. I spoke at the time, the deferral is just a deferral. It's putting something off. It's not a cut. But, it has, worked for us this year. So that's why I'm quite interested in seeing that. I think also, and this question, we have funding set aside, for the major capital project, the Performing Arts Center, I think 14.2 million or something like that. So what, if anything, could be tapped from that set aside account? You can explain the financial niceties to me, Alicia, but I'm sure that's a question that some of us may get.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't have a pot of money set aside with 15 million in it. We have essentially $3 million in one-time capital funding that would essentially make those mortgage payments. So right now within our capital program that we're looking at, the list we're looking at, there's about $4.9 million in new projects or new funding. $3 million of that would be that funding. So if we cut that and use that for balancing the budget, that would mean essentially that going forward, we don't have that debt room available anymore. So if we're flipping that over to operating, we're using that for operating expenses and not debt payments or one-time capital payments.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. But seems to me does remain one of the factors that we would call on staff to examine in coming back to us with some recommendations.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. They'll be on the list, and that $3 million will be identified.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Seeing no further questions, I did in an earlier conversation with staff today.
Mr. Chair, I believe Councillor Price has his hand raised.
My apologies, Councillor Price. Go ahead, please.
Apology accepted, Mr. Chair. Some very, very good discussion tonight amongst all of you folks, and certainly a lot to think about. I certainly don't mind saying at least this much right now. I'm not at all interested in raising taxes. Not the time. So hopefully we can put our heads together and come up with a solution. I'm actually quite impressed that the figure is as small as it is. I think staff have done a phenomenal job, and previous councillors to put us in this position, that at least we have some options to think about other than raising taxes. So everything's been covered, and some great discussion. And I was wondering, we heard some comments tonight about staffing and the pressures of staffing, and I'm just wondering if it's possible maybe when we get some of this information back about capital and stuff, if we could also get a little update from the CAO on staffing in general and how we're doing in that area and how people are feeling. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Alicia, would that be a conversation for the service budget part, or would that fit into capital?
Through you, Mr. Chair, on the service side of things, as far as staffing goes, that could be a discussion that we could bring forward as an option to discuss. We'll have to chat and figure out what that budget schedule looks like going forward.
Thank you, Alicia, for your presentation tonight. We have more time. I don't mean to end the conversation before it's due. I did talk to staff earlier in the...
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Now I have my hand raised.
Excellent. Go ahead, please.
Sorry about that. Thanks. Just wanted to follow up. First, I think there's been a great discussion, and with the exception of my rant that I went on, I think the discussion's been really good. I meant everything I said, but I think the rest of the discussion's been really good. Especially, Councillor McDermott, I noted a couple of points here. Councillor McDermott mentioned the capital, and I think that certainly he's bang on there. I think we've got to take a hard look at capital. And especially as Councillor Chase followed up in regards to our one-time room that we've developed as we wait for the capital project to move forward. I think that's, I think that we've got to take a very serious look at that. I think there's just an absolute wonderful opportunity there for us to address this in this current year based on that. Councillor Millay and I think the mayor mentioned potential government funding to help through this based on lost transit revenue and some other things. I think we've got to push. I would maybe put out to the mayor to follow up with the province and say, look, we need some guidance here. We need guidance on what you're going to do in 2021, if anything, so that we understand what's going to happen here. So that we can build it. You want us to do a budget, you've got to give us the parameters. And if there is funding available, you need to tell us what that funding is going to look like. We're not the only ones in this situation. Most people are in a tougher one than we are. So I might just suggest, we talked a lot about capital, and I would say before we send our staff back to start looking at services and the difficult decisions they would have to make on cutting services, should we look at the capital budget first? That's my question to council. And I don't know what others think, but cutting services is it's a difficult proposition and raises a lot of angst amongst staff. So I wonder if we might be better served to see what comes out of the capital discussion first. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. That's an excellent point. Our budget calendar does allow for that kind of natural movement from our capital budget consideration to our service budget consideration. But we'll make sure that staff are focused on that moving into the capital budget as well. I now have Deputy Mayor Hicks.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of respond, I guess, to Dan's last point. I'm not sure if he missed it or I missed it, but it kind of sounded like we kind of had a bit of a consensus that capital is where the majority of council was looking at, instead of sending staff on a wild goose chase. And maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I know that a couple people mentioned it, but it seemed like that was the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak.
Mike Baldwin, you're on the line, and then Kevin Dare, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to briefly do Councillor Keenan's comment in terms of looking or working with the province. We are in discussions on the capital side with the province around funding related to COVID relief. So, you know, it is, as Alicia pointed out, it's the timing's the issue there of understanding and having clarity of what will qualify and how our projects shuffle out. So I just wanted to be clear that that is ongoing on the infrastructure side. And I think on the other operational funding from the province, I think there's some questions certainly there around timing, and we're eager to learn too. And perhaps you're, to the councillor's point, we can certainly reach out again. I think we've heard perhaps some chatter over the last number of days, but some clarity on the operational side certainly would be helpful. But I just want to make it clear that we are ongoing and have been and will continue to work on the capital side of what we have and what could qualify. So it's a work in progress there.
Thank you, Michael. Councillor Dare, please.
Can you hear me okay?
You're good to go.
Okay. I'm mobile right now, so I'm not sure how well it's going to pan out. I listened to most of the conversation. I came in when Councillor McDermott was speaking, so I missed the presentation. I'm not sure what I missed before that as far as speakers go, but I think Council has captured pretty much, you know, the thoughts of what most of the residents in the city have been thinking and where we want to go. I myself feel similar to Councillor Millet, and that is I'm leaning more towards the hybrid model. But when it comes to cutting, the city services portion is the part that scares me the most. You know, there's nothing. I mean, we just went through a time period where people felt like they had nothing to do and they were stuck in their homes, and all they wanted to know was when's the walking track going to open up, and when's the rink's going to open up, and when can we go to the park, and when's the pool's going to open up, right? So all these services is what they're mostly interested in. So I think that the capital side of things and cutting that and looking at those capital purchases, equipment, big capital investments, things like that, is things that should be accounting first, or at least look at anyway. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I'll leave it at that. I'm mobile right now, okay?
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions moving forward? I'll try. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you want to have an opportunity to say something, but if we're moving down this path of looking at capital budgets, the capital budget first, which is one that I completely support, as I stated, should we do that first? Is that something that we would do? I know that we had talked about CAO presenting and when that would be and would that come with service budget, but maybe it is something that we're going to be able to get to through capital projects. So we could just start there. It'd be nice if we could figure it out with just going that route. So, okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I've been keeping track as we've been going along, those individuals interested in a tax increase versus not. There seems to be an overwhelming consensus right now to not tax our way out of this problem. That being the case, it's also the prerogative of the chair to ask for information from staff. So I'll have on the table as well for us to consider the elimination of the inside tax rate that we have here at the city. Some of our residents pay a reduced rate that at one time was considered because they were seen as getting reduced services and infrastructure. I'm no longer sure that argument makes any sense. It's a large amount of money. It's over $600,000 that we can contribute to our budget. And I'll make sure that information is made available to council for our decision-making in the future. Although very clearly it would definitely mean increasing the taxes of our residents to some measure. But technically, they're paying less and their neighbors are paying more. Nonetheless, Councillor McGarity.
Yeah, just to follow up, I like to see a report back on a whole different hybrid type of thing, on different areas. Let's not rule any area out, and then we have to make a big decision. That's what I like. Don't leave any rock uncovered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I'll invite you out to my area so you can see how much has changed there in the last 20 years, which is nothing.
Well, I'll be looking to you to make the coherent argument for a tax rate differential that's based on water and sewer when it has nothing to do with water and sewer. Anyway, more on that in the future. Seeing no further questions, we've come to the end of that item. The next item up on the agenda, item 1.2, is the 2020 Innovation Challenges. And we have a presentation from Michael Baldwin and Adam Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to tee this up with a couple slides. Adam's going to get into the meat of the innovation challenges, the substance, where we've been, and then conclude with where we're going. And this is in response to, I think, two parts. Number one, there was a request to get an update on where we are with our lean initiative. And this obviously is very timely because it was part of just the previous conversation. And also it's important, I think, for us as staff to highlight to council some of the things we've been working on sort of in a new format around innovation and trying to bring some things together in a challenging time, bring it together to solve some problems. So maybe we'll kick off. And we talked about this early on in March. There was a number of things we were doing. We were fully, and we still are, under the EOC model to some extent around as we work through the COVID situation. And then the other parallel track we had was around what can we do as an organization to leverage the change? What could we do to respond to it in a timely fashion and sort of learn, as some within the organization have said, change the oil mid-flight and see if there's some opportunity here to introduce some real change and change some processes. At the same time, recognizing, and the previous conversation around the budget impacts would evolve over time. There would certainly be, ebbs and flows in terms of the challenges. So what we're seeing now, we dealt with the first challenge when we knew we had an initial deficit for 2020, and council made some decisions then. Now we are facing 2021. We knew this was a long game, and that financial piece continues to evolve, and council will have, obviously at the conclusion of the last conversation, another opportunity. Staff will come back with some options around the solution to close that gap for 2021. But on this note, the other piece was, let's see what we could do and learn and change some of the things, how we work within the organization. So leverage the change. This is kind of, I would say it's a good news story in terms of being able to pivot in a time of challenge, as well as timely in terms of looking at the lean program. So it was through conversation, Adam and I back and forth around, okay, what are we doing? What have we done in terms of around the service center, in terms of the changes we needed to make, in terms of closing down to the public for a period of time, but still needing to provide services. What would be an interesting way to try to capture that and also solve some real pinch points now? So the idea around innovation challenges, nothing like putting a timeline and a little bit of competitiveness into solving some problems amongst a set of teams. So we took a team approach, 5 projects, looking at those projects and what the potential impacts would be. These are projects that were identified through the hopper, so to speak. We knew they were important within the organization. So Adam will get into the detail on that. And then we'll talk about how we've learned from that and where we want to go. So the 2021 plan for improvement and innovation, the idea around how we want to strategically align and also renew the focus for the I&I in that practice and what does it mean going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Adam to get into the nuts and bolts of the challenges, and then we'll bring it back to talk about how we're looking for the future. And I think that does play into, again, the previous conversation around where we are for the 2021 budget and how we're going to view that from an innovation/improvement point of view.
Thank you, Michael. So as you are well aware and has been raised several times this evening, COVID-19 presented us with many challenges this past year, but also in those challenges, we saw opportunities. And most of the opportunities that were noticed were how the organization was able to quickly pivot to adapt to those challenges and present services in new ways, as Michael outlined. And really what we saw is the opportunity to leverage the change and to use what we're seeing as a tool to improve efficiencies in some places in response to COVID. But also we wanted to improve efficiencies for now, but also in the long term. And we saw ways that we were able to use technology along with business innovation for some of those efficiencies and respond to COVID. But we didn't want to do that just in a way that was a reactive response to COVID. We wanted to make changes that were in line with some of our longer term strategic objectives. So as we looked at how we would address those COVID challenges, we also looked to align ourselves with other longer term strategic priorities that we have. For example, we have a strategy and a plan for digital transformation. We have certain information technology strategies that we've been working through for the past several years, and we have a roadmap forward on those. We also have what we call the I&I unsolved mysteries. So in some cases, we'll do I&I projects with groups, and we recognize a problem, and we get a certain way through, and we just can't seem to get over the hump. How do we solve this particular challenge? And we have a hopper of some of those. And then we also look through the lens of divisions' priority problems. So business units have strategies that they're also working on. And so when we looked at the COVID challenges and opportunities through the lens of business unit priorities, we saw certain priorities sort of bubble to the top. When we also then looked at the lens of what are the I&I unsolved mysteries, or what has happened in the past, and we go into a work group and do value stream mapping where we examine what are all the activities they do, how are they trying to produce value, and where are they faced with challenges. And we have the sort of the top priorities in those work groups. And sometimes those priorities get stuck. So we looked through that lens. And then finally, we look through the lens of our information systems. So where do we have infrastructure deficit in our information systems? Where are they old and not serving us well? What are our plans for upgrades? And when we applied all those lenses, we sort of bubbled through some themes of some ideas where we are kind of stuck or challenged, but we had longer term needs. And so where we saw particular projects converge in the center of all those things, we created, as Mike outlined, these innovation challenges. And there's really kind of two things that these innovation challenges have helped us do. One is strategic alignment, and the other is it allowed us to do small experiments in these areas to rapidly innovate. And what strategic alignment allowed us to do is to focus many different business units on a similar problem, and using small experiments allowed us to take some steps. And what the COVID beginning of the pandemic showed us is that we are able to respond very, very quickly to changing conditions when we're forced to do so. So we sort of forced ourselves into putting some time constraints around these challenges and executing on them. So we found 5 problems that were sort of the epicenter of a business unit's priority, an I&I unsolved mystery, some piece of technology deficit that we have, and some problem from COVID. And we found 5 problems that fit those common lenses, and we formed 5 teams around them. So these teams were made from existing staff that we have, but we formed them in new team compositions that we haven't necessarily used before. And we gave them some new technology, but that technology is building on some existing strategies that we have. So what we noticed right away was having the trained Lean Six Sigma process facilitators on the team was a tremendous advantage. And those core tools that we've practiced over the last 9 years had been a tremendous advantage on those teams. So what we recognize is that over the last 9 years, we've saved a lot in budget. It came up in our first budget meeting, the accumulated savings that recur over and over are of value to us. but also that training that staff have had and that competency that we have as an organization is a tremendous asset to us. But we also gave them immediate access to new technology and a way to rapidly implement that. So we added to these teams right away a member from our IT staff, but we also supplemented them with technical experts from our partners at Bulletproof, and we put them on the teams right away to give them immediate access to new technology. We also put on the team business users in each of those areas who could give immediate feedback on whether those technologies would work and to provide feedback for the process facilitators if those business processes would work. And then we also added on what we called an executive sponsor, someone from the business unit who understood what the business unit's priorities were and where their strategies were headed. And these were our teams of 5 people. And so they had immediate access to some facilitation help, some immediate access to some technology. The business users were able to immediately try on the technology and the process and give rapid feedback. We also gave them very short timelines. So we gave them 10 weeks over the middle of summer where everyone had vacations planned and while we were in the middle of a pandemic where no one could meet in person. So their constraints were enormous. Only 10 weeks, everyone's got to take a vacation, you can't meet in person, here's a huge challenge, see what you can do. And what we asked them to do is just experiment really, really quickly, like use the technology folks to build you something quickly, have the business people try it on, give immediate feedback. And we asked them within 10 weeks to provide us with a rapid prototype of what you would do and use your executive sponsor to help you understand, is what we're creating going to create value for the organization? And so the 5 projects that we worked on were employee status forms, HR personnel records, a motor vehicle accident smart form, property files, and engineering project information management. So each of these were issues in COVID where we couldn't access each other. We couldn't come into City Hall to get a record. We couldn't pass off a paper form. We had engineers working remotely from home needing to share information on projects. But there are also areas where we have strategic priorities. So Jane has been before council presenting the HR tactical plan and the pillars of that plan and wanting to move our organization forward. We know what police's priorities are, and we know for sure their priorities aren't filling out paperwork and passing that around. So they're very important projects. In employee status forms, we took a paper form and basically using our technology strategy and the platform that we're using to digitize the city, we had the team build an app for this form. And so on the surface, it may not look like that big of a deal, but every time an employee is hired, transferred, promoted, goes on leave, any sort of change for an employee, one of these status forms gets created, it's signed by a director, it's passed around between compensation and benefits, there's some information that flows to parking and IT, and it gets passed around quite a bit. And so digitizing this form has created an enormous amount of savings. In fact, this team, which was led by Valerie Kelly, estimates they'll save about $2,000 a year in printing and paper and gas for driving this form around. And they'll probably save 600 hours of staff time just passing a form around. So it's adding no value to the organization. So those are good savings. In the HR personnel records project, they estimate they'll save about $12,000 in gas and paper, just driving personnel records around, coming to City Hall to retrieve a record. And they'll save about 400 hours of staff time. You also notice what's not included in there is waiting time, 37,000 hours. People just sit around waiting for, a doctor's note to be, received or a form to be filled out or retrieve a file. It's a lot of wasted time. And the space savings that digitizing these files will save about $18,000 a year in space savings. So they're not insignificant projects. They make staff and management's life a lot easier. And if you can imagine now in those 2 areas, status forms and personnel records, the city will project to save between $14,000 a year just in hard costs and maybe 1,000 hours of staff time. So this was time that can now be redirected towards elements in that HR tactical plan. So HR has some priorities. Filling out paperwork and managing files isn't one of them. And through these type of innovation projects, now we can free up those resources to focus on those strategic priorities. So for those reasons, they're tremendously impactful projects. The I&I unsolved mystery that we'll highlight is an improvement in the motor vehicle accident form. So what you're kind of looking at is the process map that our facilitators were able to go in and uncover what are all the steps that have to happen from the time a vehicle gets in an accident till the time that all the paperwork is completed, sent to a lawyer, sent to an insurance company, sent to the province's department for infrastructure so they can know about the accident, sent internally to the city's engineers so they know where accidents are happening. So they mapped out this whole process. And basically, if you can imagine, the old process is a paper-based form that the officers fill out in the field. They're busy, then they turn into their NCO who corrects it and sends it back when there's errors. Then it goes down to the clerks. They redact it with this cardboard cutout that they can send some information to some people and some to others. So you kind of see this process doesn't really make a lot of sense when we have priorities for police that don't really involve officers filling out paperwork and clerks photocopying with cardboard cutouts. But this team was kind of stuck. Well, now what do we do? So with the way we formatted the team to give them a technology expert and a process facilitator and business users and put Inspector Patterson on the team to guide them, we were able to also build on that technology strategy and create for them an app that they can fill out in the car that will automatically get routed around and reduce a lot of time. And I think they're expecting to pilot this with one platoon starting this week. So a little technology, a little creativity, some new format for forming teams, using some new ideas, using a little bit of new technology, using some assets that we have already in our process facilitators can completely change an aspect of policing. And this was a project that came up when I did some work with the administrative area in policing, and they said, what is the biggest waste of time? The biggest waste of time for administration was taking these forms in, photocopying them, send them to insurance companies, et cetera. So with some technology, we'll automate all of that stuff. But it's not just technology, it's the creativity of the business users, of the process facilities, of the teams working together. And so using some existing assets, some existing know-how that we have, adding some new technology, a little bit new way of shaping these teams together has allowed us to break through and overcome some challenges from COVID. Some I&I unsolved mysteries, allows us to move forward on our technology strategies and allows these departments that we're working with to take resources from mundane tasks and then now focus them on more priority issues that they have. Before I ask Mike to maybe come back and just explain the strategies that we're working for in 2021, I just want to bring up some quotes that I found about what innovation is. And these are some government quotes from the UK and some private quotes. But some people think innovation is about creating new processes or services with the aim of improving efficiency, which we definitely were able to do through these challenges and in these challenging times. But they also talk about creating competitive advantage, the successful exploitation of new ideas, the right innovation techniques that can help save time and money and give competitive advantage. And I think while we are always looking for efficiencies and savings and doing these projects to free up staff time so staff aren't frustrated photocopying paperwork and accessing paper files, and while we're trying to give them the ability to do that remotely and automatically, I think the thing that I would leave you with before I ask Mike to come back is, what is our idea of competitive advantage and how does I&I help us achieve competitive advantage? Well, for us, competitive advantage means taking our resources and focusing them on those strategies that we have. So in these challenges, we kind of look to clean up some old processes and automate and streamline those so we could take staff time and money and expertise and focus them on the priorities that were important. But I think as we move forward, what we should be striving to do is take that innovation that we can have as a team and start to focus it on those strategies that we have before us, start to implement new ways of thinking about how do we roll out the HR tactical plan? How do we help police be more innovative in their work? How do we help engineering stay focused on managing projects and not files and help them move forward in their techniques? So it's not the solution to all the problems that we discussed earlier, but it's certainly one key that is important for us as an organization. And with that, I'll invite Michael to talk a little bit about how we're refocused for 2021.
Thanks, Adam. And I think, the key point there, alignment for strategic priorities is absolutely critical, and putting the resources in the right place. And the other piece around the innovation challenge was it was a pilot to test out that model. about bringing people together, obviously in a period, an interesting period. And I think it's fair to say it was very successful from a motivational point of view. I think even, the challenges throughout the summer of, people being off for vacation in the compressed timeline, it was really successful in terms of motivating them. Because again, they had those that had the lean expertise working with the business owners. It really created what we think is a pretty unique environment and culture. So we're excited by that because now we wanted to test it. Now we can say, can we scale it? Can we scale it into areas that perhaps are more global corporate issues, or where there may be other opportunities for innovation or savings? So really what we want to do going forward is we've got this academy. We've built an academy around the lean tools, and we have an alumni base within our own organization that is pretty deep. We've got existing trained facilitators who know the fundamentals of lean. We think that continues to be, a core principle, how we approach problems, that critical thinking that goes along with that training. So we want to continue to build on that culture and urgency around continuous improvement. And I think, as I know Chris has said this before, speaking with council, and I think we've heard it from outsiders or other organizations that have used lean, is you can always, continuous improvement is it is continuous, and there are savings that to be had and efficiencies to be found. So I think what happens, as a program evolves, there's a need to go look at the actual program and its structure itself. So we need to continuously improve to the model. So we're working to refresh the core team, where we've started to make some changes there now. The idea about, when you've come on board, you've trained, now going back to a division or a department to apply those skills, bringing in new minds, fresh minds to come in and train is hugely important. We want to evolve the improvement innovation strategy, develop some additional, and really that means develop some additional competencies and perhaps use some new tools. So what we've realized in each one of the innovation challenges and some of the other projects that we have underway, certainly in the corporate services department, project management is a huge skill set. And we know that a lot of what we do, even on the capital side, through internal service adjustments and even digital solutions, project management is key. Design thinking, empathy mapping, rapid prototyping, and other technical competencies that we think will add to the base around core principles, augment and add to the fundamentals around lean and those core principles. And we do want to adapt our techniques and the format we used with a little bit of experimentation and learning, and those innovation challenges and leverage the change opportunity. I guess is a good example of that. We seized the opportunity and said, let's try it. Let's work on that bundle of projects. They're kind of key denominators, as I would call them, that needed to be solved. They were, bugging a whole bunch of people across the org. Let's use this opportunity to solve it. So I think that sort of bias, we've always said bias towards yes, that bias towards yes to, switch up the model a bit, I think was refreshing and helpful. And so overall, we're working to refocus the mandate. Again, key component of that for us is, and we've talked a lot about strategic alignment when we think about our digital journey. So what we've worked on from a customer service point of view, in the service center, what we're doing to update our ability on the water and sewer billing software, and also how we've used Oracle to date on the digital Fredericton. Really focused on strategic alignment, where our priorities are, and recognizing that we need to focus on the pinch points within departments and help that, when Adam mentioned that sustainable advantage, that competitive advantage, why not focus on those areas that we know people really need the help with? So it is very much around alignment and being very strategic in the projects that we go after. And it's a structured program, focused on process improvement, making sure folks have the competencies and the ability to identify those key problems and priorities, and then to assign the resources in a timely fashion. And those resources are obviously the skill set needed to work through the program or the problem, and identify the process improvement, but also on the technical side. And then be, accountability around results. Is there another slide there, Adam? So I guess maybe some concluding remarks on that. That we think it's important to continue. We know it's important to continue on the continuous improvement journey and the use of lean tools, but we think there's an opportunity to add to those and sort of redefine the program itself for I would say a stronger strategic alignment and also matching up those folks that have the problems with folks that are going to help with the solution, and putting some real timelines in place to deliver the improvement, the outcome, and also if it involves technology, making sure that resource is there too. So it's almost like a design build, so to speak, in the building world of how we want to approach this. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over. Adam and I'd be happy to answer questions. We thought it was timely to come back with this because we do think it's important. We think it's culturally important, and we think it's important to continue to improve how we deliver services going forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michael. First question is from Councillor McGarity.
Great report. And stuff like this is going to bring us through the hardest of times. And we have been going through some hard times, and there's no help yet on the horizon. To be a smart city, when change, the only thing that won't change is change itself. I've said that, but I mean, we also make changes to work smarter, work faster. It's the speed of communications. The more communications, the better data we have, we can make better decisions all through the corporation, all through the city. So it's getting to almost point to predictive analysis and sort of almost predicting what's going to happen, which is a little scary out there in the future. But then again, if we provide our employees with the proper tools, the smart tools, then we're going to see the benefits of these for many years to come. So it's a good culture for the city to uptake, and it has been, and it's going to prove its worth for many years to come. So look, I just want to thank everybody that's involved in these projects. First of all, the best of luck, and thank you for what you're doing to make our city stand out as being a smart city. Because right now we gotta be all smart in everything we do, because as they say, we have some serious challenges before us. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rogers.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I guess I would just like to echo that. I think now more than ever, it's important that we continue to do this work. It's very easy in a time of crisis to drop the ball on what's innovative, or to drop the ball on future planning and looking ahead and responding now to make changes for things that we want into the future. And I guess it's very easy to be reactive in times like this. But I think so it's more important than ever that that we continue to stay on this vein of constantly innovating, constantly improving. Also, we're somewhat modeling behavior. I mean, we're being the city that we want, right? So we're modeling to, and perhaps we're following their lead. I mean, it's hard to know when you're a smart city. Did the knowledge sector influence us? How much are we influencing the knowledge sector? But regardless, a lot of the practices that come out of projects such as these are, to me, create a character of the kind of city that we very much constantly strive to be. So I think it's important that we continue to behave that way ourselves, and that we have that culture here ourselves. I also think that it's like an entrepreneurial spirit. To do some of these things is very much an entrepreneurial spirit that it's important to foster. And so I think that this work is really important. It would have been really easy during a pandemic not to have done any of this, to instead deploy to other areas and solving other problems. But I think that it's really important to continue on. It's something we've been investing in for 10 years. It's important that this work continues, and that people see us continuing to do this work. I think that that's important too. So I think that we should be promoting this, the fact that we're continuing to do this work, even as we counter all of these other struggles that this pandemic's brought to us. So thanks, you guys, for doing this and for sharing it with us. And when I hear those hours of savings, I mean, yeah, money is one thing, but I got to tell you, there's no savings like time savings. because that's something you can't get back. So I think that those numbers of hours, which equate to heaven knows how many dollars, really, that's the real value here in my mind.
Thank you, Councillor. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank Mike and Adam for coming up with this concept. I asked them to look at the I&I program and see if we could re-energize it, and they have. I was able to participate in the program and see what the teams had done, working with our partners at Bulletproof, which was a new concept that our folks came up with to work with some local IT firms to bring their expertise into our shops and hopefully learn from them. One thing I do think it did demonstrate quite well is Lean has a perception just in the name of it that it's cutting. And as you see, there was no cutting here. We're cutting frustration. And there's no such thing as not, continually improving is not a bad thing. And it's not about reducing the workforce. It just means less work for the folks that are currently in those services and better service to the public. Because we are, and we may not think of it this way, but we do have to compete as a municipality. We're competing for residents, we're competing for business, and we need to keep our quality of life at a certain level that people want to live here. And I think I shared with you an article today that talks about the pandemic has meant a lot of people can work from home now. They don't have to live in the big cities. They can live where it's less expensive to live and where the quality of life may be better. And so there's going to be competition for those folks, and you can already see it in our local market. I think there is people relocating here because it is a nice city to live in. We have good technology. We have a core of information technology. And in Adam's role as the Chief Information Officer, he's been playing a role in the community, and this is part of it. So I think there's a bigger play at work here. One, it's good for our employees, it's good for the organization, but it's good for the city overall that we're doing these types of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Excellent points. I guess to that end, chairs have no formal powers to make recommendations, but I would strongly suggest that our governance committee, working with the city clerk's office and those designing the orientation of new councillors next year, seriously consider putting the Lean Six Sigma Champion certificate program as part of the orientation package. Maybe to address Councillor Rogers' comments or even perhaps Councillor Keenan's comments from earlier in the meeting, but increasing council's familiarity with Lean Six Sigma, the processes and all the rest of it has been shown to help directors and then whole organizations move faster through the process. And it would be pulled on council to make that smart decision, I think. Nonetheless, that's the end of our agenda as presented. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I have my hand up.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Price. Councillor Price. You're free to ask a question.
There we go. Sorry, 2 seconds, guys. Thank you, Chair. Look, I remember when I first joined council and we did our little Lean Sigma tour around the city, and I was so impressed by that. By everything that's done with Lean Sigma and the phenomenal job that staff have done on Lean Six. And I always appreciate these meetings with Adam when we get these updates on Lean Six. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Excellent points. Thank you, Councillor. Sorry to not recognize your hand a second time tonight. No further items. This meeting is adjourned.